Resident Evil 4's remake stuck pretty close to the original in terms of the story that it told. Not that we should have been expecting it to deviate a great deal, but aside from the when and occasionally where, the how was left mainly untouched. However, that being said, there were a few times that this game dipped into some new territory, be that in the backstory or further story implications, so today I thought we'd talk about a few of those times, delving into some of the major canon changes and if any of them could potentially have lasting ramifications for the story. Starting first with... When I initially played through the Resident Evil 4 remake, there was a glaring omission that I think almost anyone who played the original would have noticed. I'm of course talking about the lack of the U3 boss fight, which just kinda comes out of nowhere in the original game, but is nonetheless a memorable section of the island. In the base game of the remake though, U3 is completely absent, aside from a document that basically states that he is now a Verdugo. A baffling revelation, considering the two had no known connection from the original, and didn't seem to share any new similarities during Leon's base game story in the remake. And then the Separate Ways DLC came out. If you haven't played it, Ada's story has seen a drastic overhaul from its telling back during the original, with one of the biggest switch-ups being the inclusion of the black-robed Verdugo, which infects her with its own version of the Las Placas parasite, and repeatedly stalks her as she succumbs to the effects of that infection. What does this have to do with U3, you may ask? Well, during that DLC, we fight said black-robed Verdugo, and its looks might be a little familiar. That's right. Somewhere under that robe, this thing was hiding a massive centipede tail. This was a huge reveal to me, as it made more sense to the document from the base game, as well as placed U3 into a more logical context than the original game ever did. In that game, we got nothing for the creature outside of some scraps of details from external sources, but here we are given the concrete details of not only who Verdugo was, but also what U3 is. Apparently, this creature was a woman named Pasanta, a housekeeper who elected to undergo wild experiments to make herself a bug-human hybrid. These experiments failed though, so they had to use another type of DNA, thus the name U3. However, while all this is fascinating, and I could talk much more about the updates they've made to Verdugo's story, since they're both dead, the lore kinda stops with how interested you are in these baddies. So while it's a massive adjustment to the story of this game, since it won't impact the future R universe moving forward, U3 makes it to the 5th spot on this list. Krauser is a difficult character to pin down. I made a lore video on him, I've also made another video talking about why his backstory is so complicated, but in terms of his actual changes in motivation, he's a character that got a major overhaul. To give you a short synopsis, Krauser from the original game was in league with both Ada and Wesker in their plans to acquire a dominant species plaga. While Ada was on the outside, Krauser had infiltrated Los Illuminados at the behest of Wesker and was attempting to gain favor to acquire a sample of the parasite. A difficult task since Sadler was hesitant to trust him. In the remake though, this subplot is entirely adjusted as he's now in full league with Sadler and a trusted member of the gang. He has no real affiliation with Wesker that we know of, and has instead been brought into the arms of Los Illuminados after a mission in South America. This mission, Operation Javier, would go sideways for Krauser and his team when they would be wiped out by BOWs and the US would abandon them, with Krauser being the only one to survive. Having seen the power these bioweapons possessed, he wanted it for himself and would link up with Sadler under that goal. But not only do these motivations shift, we also see a redefined relationship between Krauser and Leon. In the original game, these two were more rivals than Rookie and Commander. Their foreknowledge of each other coming from a mission they had in the original canon, which was featured in Resident Evil Darkside Chronicles. In the remake though, this more peer relationship has been swapped for Krauser being Leon's former trainer. That connection being the discourse that defines most of their conversations, with, I guess, Leon surpassing him in the end. I don't know, Krauser's confusing as all hell in terms of storyline, especially if you're going to try to mesh the Darkside Chronicles canon into the new storyline of the remakes. Like I said, I have a video on it, but even without delving into that, Krauser had a lot of changes and played a much more prominent role in Leon's life, so it's possible that he could have some lasting effect on his psyche in the future. He's also confirmed to be where Wesker gets his sample of Las Plagas, which I believe was implied in the original timeline, but I don't know if it was confirmed. Anyways, yeah, 4th on the list. My God, Luis. They absolutely crushed it with this character in my opinion. I always liked Luis in the original game, but the remake makes him 10 times better. It's not so much that he will necessarily have an impact on the story moving forward. Come to think of it, I should have maybe put him lower on this list for that reason, but they did make some big changes to him and his story that I feel are deserving of recognition. For starters, the perhaps biggest change that he's seen is in his ties to Umbrella. I'm not 100% sure, but from what I remember, the origins of Luis are largely kept ambiguous in the original game, with a few details trickling down from the in-game documents, and a few from the developer interviews and whatnot. From these sources, we'd known that Luis lived in the village with his grandfather, and that he left and came back to work for the Los Illuminados at a later date. However, what we didn't know was that during the time he was away from the village, he'd been employed by Umbrella. Not only that, but he was part of Umbrella Europe's 6th laboratory, which oversaw research into the Nemesis Alpha parasite, eventually leading to the development of Nemesis, who gave Jill such a headache in Resident Evil 3. This is a very interesting connection that gives Luis deep ties to the series, and may even be the reason he was familiar with Wesker to create this kind of alliance with him and his allies in the first place.
The deal was, we get you out of here when you deliver the amber. No amber, no protection, Luis.
Such a stickler for details, Hyde.
But even more than that, I just love the depth that they've given it. To me, Luis is the character who gained the most from the remake. Luis isn't a hero, and he knows it. His research is responsible for so much devastation in the world, but he's kind of been numb to that destruction because he's always in the lab, far removed from the chaos. When he meets Leon and Ashley, though, those former atrocities are thrown right in his face, and his conscience begins to devour him. To the point that he's now willing to die just for the small redemption of saving his new friends. All this culminating with his death at the hands of Krauser. His last words asking if a person can actually change. Are you your past actions, or are you your present trials? It's an emotional scene that really just solidifies his metamorphosis in this game, and while it may not affect the narrative much in the future, it certainly makes this game that much more memorable. I am not a person who ever really minded Ashley in the original game. I didn't find her to be the burden that everybody else seemed to in terms of gameplay, but in relation to the story, I can see where those sort of damsel in distress lines could have been drawn based on the millions of times she got kidnapped, especially in the castle. In the remake, she still gets kidnapped a fair bit, but it's in less embarrassing ways. Sadler exerts his control in ways that both embolden him as a threat and lessen Ashley as an annoyance. To make a direct comparison, in a scene from the original, Ashley starts coughing up blood, which scares her and she runs into a trap. In the remake, she gets possessed by Sadler and almost stabs Leon, causing her to run away in fear that she could kill him. Both involve her running away in fear, but one seems much more reasonable in relation to the situation. Small adjustments like this abound with Ashley, probably because she was such a contentious character, but they mostly serve to soften some of the more annoying edges and make her more competent. Not in ways that make it seem like she could handle this place without Leon, but in ways that show that she's actively trying to do what she can to help.
Smells pretty bad. You okay?
Yeah. Before this would have killed me, though.
Like I said, I could be here all day talking about the many small changes that Ashley underwent in terms of her overall story, but it's really a change of temperament that defines her character in the remake, and it could have ramifications on the story moving forward, depending on what Capcom wants to do. In the remake, she makes the comment that she actually enjoys this kind of mission-focused life that Leon seems to lead, and wouldn't mind trying to do something similar in the future. Of course, this is an offhand comment, and you could slough it off as just the heat of the moment, but with the reception that she's received since release, I could now see her actually stepping into the agent role. I wouldn't say it's likely, but it's a big enough personality change to land her on the second spot of this list. Ada saw a massive character shift in this game, not only in terms of the story that she goes through, but also in terms of her personality. If you've ever played the original Separate Ways, or even the story in Resident Evil 6, then she always comes off as very distant to me. We don't get many real details on her life, we don't see many conversations between her and other characters, nor does she convey her true thoughts on most matters. We, as the player, have scant few more details about Ada than does someone in her life like Leon or Chris. In the original Separate Ways, Ada was working for another organization while working for Wesker. However, in the remake it seems that either she just doesn't talk about this other organization, or she is truly in cahoots with him and only him from the jump. From what I remember, this other organization doesn't really come back around anyways, unless it was Derek Simmons, but it is important nonetheless, because this small change cuts a lot of pretense with Ada in the remake, and allows us to finally get some character out of her. Ada remains all about her business, but she's a bit less matter-of-fact in her approach. We see her question things. She's subservient to Wesker, who plays a larger, more aggressive role. She concedes that her time in Raccoon City did actually change the kind of person she wants to be. We even get the tiniest little morsel of her backstory in a very easily missable line of dialogue.
Burning flesh. I thought I'd left that life behind.
This may seem like minor tweaks in the grand scheme of things, but the butterfly effect could be huge in terms of where the story is going. And all that's not even to mention the giant shakeup in the mission she has. It's a completely new series of events that she goes through, with a bigger emphasis on her ties with Leon, as well as an enormous bump to her relationship with Luis. Assuming there's not going to be a big adjustment in the continuity, we already know where she's going in RE6. Same trajectory. She continues her life as an elite spy and eventually spurns Simmons, who creates a replacement for her. But this Ada is far more engaged with the events here, and I feel like if we ever get to the RE6 remake, the stakes could be far more interesting with this new, more relatable Ada. Like Ashley, she's seen a significant change to her personality, which is made all the more fascinating, considering we know she's integral to upcoming events, which makes her changes the most interesting in this game for me.
So, we're talking millions of casualties.
Billions.
How ambitious. We're changing course. Now.
Anyways, that's my list. What's yours? Feel free to let me know what you think in the comments down below. The RE4 remake is absolutely chock full of minor character tweaks and deviations, but these are just some that I found the most interesting for one reason or another. I'd also like to give an honorable mention to Wesker because while his story still played out virtually the same, the fact that he was actually on the island made Separate Ways all the more engaging. Then there's also the Amber, which seems to be a big deal, but to be honest with you, I don't fully understand what separates it from a dominant species plugin. They make mention several times that it's stronger, and Wesker takes Krauser's body because he was a test subject for it, but I don't think I can truly grasp if it's going to be that important until we see its ramifications potentially explored in an RE5 remake. But those are things for another day in another video. For now, thank you all for watching, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you all in the next one.